Hey guys, welcome to part 4 of our living room environment series here. I actually already recorded this part 4, but apparently I forgot to hit record or I lost the recording or something. In any case, if you notice any discrepancies between this redo of part 4 and the part 5 that did record, never mind those. So anyways, I'll try to duplicate what I did in the first part. So that being said, the first thing I want to do in this scene is, we have all of our modeling done. So I want to go ahead and start adding some materials and textures. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add the create a material for our window frame. And I want to make a nice semi-gloss white for a nice semi-gloss white trim. So I'm going to go to this little red circle over here. And I'm going to click that, and that's our Materials button, our Materials tab. So I'm going to create a new material, and it default names it Material.001. And the reason it puts the 001 is because on the default cube that we modified and turned into, the floor, ceilings, and walls, it automatically had a default material on there, just named simply Material. But we're not going to mess with that just yet. We're going to go back to the window frame. And that's the reason it put the 001 after there, because it already had a material. So it had to rename the new one so it wouldn't overwrite the old one. So in any case, we're going to rename it anyways. We're going to call this semi-gloss white. Okay. And now the color that we're going to have on our material is going to be defined by this diffuse setting. Right now it looks white, but it's actually, if you click in here, you can see it's a very light gray. So I would like to make it all the way white. So I'm going to grab this little dot here in our brightness slider. I'm going to drag that all the way up. And you can see right here there's a dot here in the middle of the colors. So say you wanted a blue color, you could drag that over to the blue. You could drag it down to the red, the yellow, whatever color you want to make it. I'm going to make it white, so I'm going to try to put it right there in the middle again, and there we go. You can also change the RGB colors here numerically if you know which ones you want, or you can just click and drag until you get it where you want it. So I want to go ahead and drag those all the way up to 1.0. That means it's 100% red, green, and blue, which combined together, their powers unite to make the color white in the RGB spectrum. Now I'm going to set the intensity. Right now it's 0.8, which is 80%. I'm going to set that to 100% bright white. Now that's the color. Now the specular is the glossiness of it. So I want to change it to a semi-gloss color. And one way to see things a little easier than just on a sphere, a way to kind of get a better idea of what they're going to look like in the render on other objects, is to select, I like to use a little monkey head, and so that gives us a better idea of what the material is going to look like on all the other items. Right now it's just only going to be on these squared off frames, so it's not going to be a big difference, but this will give you an idea of how to make your glossiness suited to the way you want it to look. So I'm going to set the intensity down. I don't want it quite that bright, so I'm going to set that to about 0.2. And then the hardness is the actual glossiness of the material. Right now it's set to 50, which is somewhat shiny. If we were to set that to 100, you can see it's a little bit more shiny. And even further still, you can go all the way up to 511 here on the Cook Tour, which is this type of specular. There's a few different types if you click on there. We'll just use the default Cook Tour here. But 511 is way too high. I'm going to drop that down to about 30. So we have a nice semi-gloss white, soft white material there. So we want to add that same material to some of these other objects. So I'm just going to click them one by one. I'm going to click the separator of the panes, and I'm going to click the little circle right there beside new, because I'm not creating a new material. I'm going to reuse the one we just created. Say semi-gloss white, so I'll select that one, and I'll add that material to our pane separators there. And I also want that on the door frame, so I'll click that little guy, semi-gloss white, and on the door itself, semi-gloss white. So there we go. So now we have our nice white material on all of our objects that we want it on. Okay, so that's how you get just a standard material. If you're not messing with any textures or any imagery or anything like that, that's all you need to do. If you want to make the chair blue or something, you can just create a new one. The same way we did the white and set it to blue, the green, yellow, whatever you want to do. But we're going to go in and we are actually going to add some textures to it. So we're going to start with the easiest part, which will be the floor, ceilings, and wall. So what I'm going to do is add what's called seams. And what seams are is exactly the same thing they are in clothing. They're separations on the final product. Like, for example, a pair of jeans or a pair of pants, you know, they have seams down the sides and then down the outside sides of the legs and then also on the inside sides of the legs. So if you were to split those seams apart and pull those pieces of fabric apart, you could lay them out flat. That's the same concept as to what adding seams are. And those are called UV maps. And the UV doesn't stand for anything like ultraviolet or anything like that. It's just another set of coordinates. Just like we have the X, Y, and Z coordinates for our 3D space, we have the UV coordinates for our texture space. Okay, so that being said, let's tab into edit mode, and I'm going to grab the edge select tool, and I'm going to outline all of the places I want to separate this model so that we can add these seams to it and add these UV coordinates onto these flat planes, on these flat pieces. So I'm going to add lines along the floor, and I'm going to go ahead and add them up the sides of the walls. Now you don't have to do this all at once like I'm doing. I'm going to go ahead and get Control E, and we're going to go to Mark Seam, and that's going to add like a red-orange line along there. That means there's a seam there. So if you want to add more, I'm going to add some more across the ceiling. All you have to do is just start selecting the new ones. Just hold down Shift and select all those guys, and we'll go Control E again, and we're going to mark the seam. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 separate pieces that are going to be mapped out when we unwrap our UV coordinates. So what we need to do now, so we know what we're doing, and when we start adding some textures to them, we can see things better if we split our window. If you go down to the bottom left, you'll see some diagonal lines. So just click and drag on those. Also, let me turn on my screencast key so you can see what I'm doing. Let's make those a little bigger. Okay, so you see what I'm doing there. All right, so I'm going to change this window here. Right now in this little box here, you see a cube and an up-down arrow. Just click on that. We're going to change that to UV/image editor. So now if I go back to my 3D viewport and I select everything, I'll select all the geometry there, and since we've added those seams, if we go U and unwrap, it's going to unwrap all those and flatten them out. So for example, if I didn't have seams, if everything's selected, I hit Control E, clear seams, it's going to clear all the seams from everything that's selected, including the seams that we had, and we try to unwrap it, it's just going to look weird. So we want to make sure we have those seams on there. So I'm going to come back over here and undo that, get those seams back on there, and it'll it'll undo and get the UV sets the way it was. Okay, so now I want to separate all these three different items. We're going to have the floor, the ceiling, and the walls as three different pieces. So I want to go ahead and give those three different sets of UV coordinates. So right now, if I go to this little triangle right here beside our materials, that's the Object Data tab. I'm going to click on that, and it's going to bring up some different options. And you can see here, under the UV maps, we now have a UV map in here. If I click and drag those two lines there, I can expand that window out a bit. I'm going to rename this UV map to Floor. Floor, there we go. And you can go ahead and, just for, if you're in your outliner here, you can set this to say UV floor, just for appearance's sake. But like I said, I did this part 4 already, and in the part 5 that I followed that earlier one with, I don't have that named UV, so I'll just go ahead and name it like I did in the first time. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the plus sign. It's going to create another one. It's basically a duplicate of floor, and I'm going to go ahead and name that one walls. Okay, we'll do it one more time, and we'll name that one ceiling. Okay, so now back to the floor. I only want the floor geometry, which if I go to the face select mode, I can select one of the faces on here, and I can hit Control L, and that'll select all of the faces that are connected to the selected face within those seam boundaries. So I selected this one face, Control L, it selected all of the faces that are inside the seams of the floor. Now if I select one on the wall, it'll do the same thing, only on the wall. And this also only works on face select. If I tried to do it on vertex select, it'd still select the whole model. Same thing with edge select, still select the whole model. So it only does that on face select. So we'll select all those so that you get an idea of how that works. So, excuse me. So we'll go Control L, get all the floor, and I want to resize the geometry over here in our image editor, UV image editor, so it fits within this grid, and that's our image boundary. So when we load an image in here, it'll load into that, and that'll be the image boundary. So we'll load this, make this bigger so it fits within those boundaries a little better. And then I want to move. It doesn't really matter because, well, let me tell you what I was going to do. I'm going to select all the rest of everything. If I go Control L and I say select inverse, it'll select everything else, and you can see it's all selected over here. I'm just going to move it up out of the way. But it's not really important that you do that because we're only focusing on this geometry right here, because we're going to create 3 separate materials for each one of these sections, and the geometry of those materials will be, you know, the only thing getting modified in the image, if that makes sense at all. So it doesn't really matter if you move those out of the way, but I did it just to show you. So anyways, so we move the floor out of the way, and let's grab the walls. We'll do the same thing on the walls. Grab each one of those guys. You can see that they're lined up a little weirdly here. The wall that has the door on it is turned sideways, so I definitely want to turn that. Go ahead and grab one vertex. Now if you're in this mode and you just use the vertex, you can still hit Control L and only select the connected pieces of that. But I'm going to rotate that 90 degrees so we have that in the same the same layout as the other. So I'm going to grab each piece. This is the back wall that has the window in it. I want to make them all the same height, because if we make them different heights, then the texture's going to map on it a little differently, and you'll be able to tell. It'll look bad. So when I grab that section of geometry that has the door, and let's make it a little shorter so it matches the same height as the wall with the window. And we'll grab that final wall over here, make that a little bigger, drag that into place there. Okay, so let's go back to the floor. Now it's only showing this now because those are the ones selected. If we select everything, you can see our floor map is still right there. Okay, so now we have that situated. And by the way, you might be thinking I skipped the ceiling. I purposely skipped that because I don't get to the ceiling until part 5. So don't worry about that for now. So we're going to jump into a website that's got some free textures you can get, and it's called cgtextures.com. Now, you have to, in order to download the high-res versions of each one of these images, all this imagery, you have to sign up for a membership, but it's free. You can get it for free, and it doesn't cost anything. You just have to answer a confirmation email, I believe, and then you get onto the site. So you can sign up for it if you like, but you don't absolutely have to, only if you want the high-res images. Now, as far as legality goes, all of the images on the site are free to use for personal or commercial use. The conditions of use: you can use it for private or commercial use, Tutor 3D graphics, blah blah blah. Feel free to go through and check all this. The only thing you can't really use this for is for Second Life models. If you're creating Second Life models and you're selling them, they don't want you to use the textures from this site. So just go ahead and read over this if you're worried about what you can and can't use it for. But other than that, for the most part, you'll probably be safe. So okay, let's get in and find us a carpet texture. So I'm just going to type carpet over here in the search box. Hit search. And that's how you find the one you want. I've already actually saved the one I wanted. I believe it was this one. So we'll click on that guy. And you can get an idea of what it's going to look like. If it's tileable seamlessly, it'll have this little preview option right here. So you click on that, it'll go to a page where it tiles that, and it looks pretty good. You can kind of tell it's a repeated pattern, but it's not that bad. So I'm going to save the small version of that. Just right click on 640 by 640. It's a square. And I'm going to save link as, and I've got it in my C drive, G backdrop, Blender files, intro to 3D, new folder. That was named textures earlier. Not sure why it renamed it, but in any case, it's going to be right there, carpet. Go ahead and save that. This is for my, like I said, I did part 4 already, so you'll see all of the textures we actually worked with already in the folder. But yes, I want to replace it. Now, if you don't feel like signing up for a membership, you can still get the texture. You just won't be able to get the high resolution. You just click on the thumbnail here and go save image as, and you can just save that small thumbnail of it. So anyways, so we'll minimize that, and let's apply that carpet texture to our carpet area. So the first thing we need to do is let's go ahead and create our 3 different materials: our ceiling, our floor, and our walls. So like I mentioned earlier, material is the first one. That's that, you know, when you first load the scene of Blender, you got the default cube, and that cube has a default material. So I'm going to go ahead and take that material, and we're going to call that one floor. That's going to be our floor texture map and material and everything. So let's create a couple of more. Hit the little plus sign there, and I'll add another texture, or add another material slot in our materials layout here. I'm going to say new material. We're going to call this one walls, okay? And then add one more, and we're going to hit new again, and this one's going to be ceiling. Now, if you wanted to separate this out just visually, so you can see what you're doing a little better, you can change the diffuse color just slightly. You're not going to see anything now because we haven't actually applied these materials to the model yet. The only material it has now is the floor. So if we change the color of the floor, everything will change. So what we need to do is tell it to only put the floor material on the floor, only put the walls on the wall, and the ceiling only on the ceiling. So the way we do that is if we tab into edit mode and we select from the geometry that we split up with seams, Control L, we can say floor assign. It's already assigned to it, but we'll go ahead and do it again. So now we want to select the walls. Select a face from each wall. Excuse me, the throat's a little dry. Let me sip of water real quick. Excuse me, sorry. So we select Control L, select all the walls. Click on the wall material, go ahead and assign that, and you can see it changed colors to the white. Now we'll select the ceiling, Control L, and assign that one. Okay, sorry I had to pause recording a little bit. My dry throat went into a coughing fit. Blah! Seemed to be okay now, though. Okay, so where were we? Let's get in and let's go ahead and add the material, or the texture map that we downloaded to the carpet. So let's pop back out of edit mode, and let's turn on texture mode right here in the viewport. We won't be able to see anything just yet because we haven't added any textures to it. So first thing I want to do is go to our floor, and then we'll make sure our floor UV map is selected. We'll tab into edit mode, select everything, good to go. Let's load that image that we downloaded. We'll open it, and it's going to be under new folder, carpet. There we go. And like I mentioned before, in part, I already did this part 4, so in later versions, that folder is actually going to be named textures. So pay no attention to the new folder name at this point. Excuse me. All right, so now we have our carpet texture loaded here, and we only want it loaded on the floor part. So what we need to do is change the display, actually the shading mode, to GLSL. And what that's going to do is this is actually the shading for if you're using the game engine, which is available, which is a little more advanced than we're going for right now, so we're not going to really mess with that at all. We'll just use the GLSL shading so that we can actually see our textures being mapped as we map them. So we'll go now to our texture settings. Go back to our materials, make sure we got the floor selected. We do. Okay, and since this was the default material on our default cube and our default scene, it also added a default texture. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that one. We're going to add a new one, and I'm going to name this one carpet. Okay, and the type is default set to clouds, which is a procedural texture. Now, we'll get to procedural textures later on in part 6, I believe. So, but for now, we're not going to mess with that. We're going to change that to image or movie. And I'm going to go ahead and click the little thumbnail image right there, little photograph, the dog-eared corner. Go ahead and choose carpet. And it's loaded in our scene. from over here, so we don't have to go open and find it again. It's already loaded in the scene. So now we can see it being broadcast, being applied to only the floor part of our model. So it looks a little big, so I want to change the tiling. So right now it's just one big floor tile, and we don't want that. I mean, it looks kind of like shaggy carpet, but it's still a little too big. It's not a dollhouse, so we need to make the carpet smaller. So we'll go down to where it says mapping, and we also want to make sure that that's set to UV. And you'll see it change the shape of it. Before it was just basically just applying it to the plane, just kind of projecting it directly onto the plane, like just without any rhyme or reason, just putting it on there flat. But since we set it up in our UV coordinates, we change that to UV, and we actually tell it floor, it'll map it correctly. Okay, so now we need to tell it to tile a few times, because right now it's just putting the within the image boundaries, it's just tiling it the one time. So we need to tell it to tile a little bit more so it's smaller on our model. So let's say 5 times. 5 on each one of the XYZ coordinates, and you can see it tiled it quite a bit smaller. So that looks quite a bit better. Now it's a little shiny, and from all the carpet I've ever seen, it's not shiny. So let's go back to our material settings and set the specular down to 0. And now we'll go back. That'll take off all of the sheen to it, so it's just basically rough, dry carpet. Now back to our texture settings. I would like, right now it's basically just a sticker on the floor, basically. You know, it's just a flat image. It could have been printed on there from a printer or something like that. So we want to actually give it a little bit of texture so it looks a little more rough and actually has some 3 dimensions, you know, some little roughness to it. So the way we do that was come down here in our texture settings, scroll down all the way close to the bottom. You'll see right now it's set to the color, which is 1.0, so it's affecting the color of our material there. Sorry, I keep clearing my throat. All this talking is drying my throat out. So we'll set the geometry normal to 1.0, and you can see it adds a lot of texture to it. Now that's a little too much, so I'm going to dumb that down to about 0.2, and that'll look a little better, maybe even smaller. Let's try 0.1, and that'll give us a little bit more of a roughy, textury feel to it. Okay, so that's the carpet, so that's good to go. That looks pretty good. Go ahead and save that. And now we'll work on the wall. So let's jump back onto CG Textures, and let's find us a good wall texture. So if we go over here to Plaster, and then we can say Loam Walls, and I've already chosen one and downloaded it. I don't remember exactly which one it was. I think it might have been this one, I think. This will give us a few different versions. We click the 3D tiling preview and we see what that looks like, and that looks okay. So we'll tile back out, or back out of that page. And I'm going to go ahead and save the 640 by 640. Save link as, and a wall. And I actually don't think that's the same one I used before. So again, it will look a little different once you get to part 5. I'm going to go ahead and replace that. So we got that in there now. So we'll do the same thing we did on the floor. Go back to our materials, select our walls, and tab into edit mode there so we can make sure we select the right UV map. Walls, there we go. And we'll go ahead and open that wall texture there. Open that. And it'll load it into our viewport over here. And since we're in GLSL shading here, it's not going to show it on the walls yet until we actually add it to the material. So we'll go to our texture settings, scroll all the way back up. The reason you got to scroll up and down is because once we were in floor, we were scrolled all the way down to the bottom. So when we switched to the other material, it still kept the same scroll, which is to the bottom, even though there's nothing there. So we'll just select new, and we'll call this one walls, okay, and change it from clouds up to image or movie. And then since we loaded it in this window, we don't have to open it again. We can just click on the drop down there and select that one. Now it looks kind of like wood paneling from the 80s or 70s or 60s or whenever it was they started putting that all over the walls. So it doesn't look that great, and it doesn't look great because it's not tiling it properly. It's doing just like it did on the floor. It's basically just projecting it flat onto the walls from above. And we don't want that. We want it to actually use these coordinates we worked so painstakingly hard on getting cut out with the seams and everything. So make sure you change the coordinates to UV. Then also make sure you select walls. Okay, so now it looks quite a bit better. It's just like the carpet. It's way too big because it's only tiling once across each section there. So we need to set that to map. We'll go ahead and set 5 again. Okay, and that's looking pretty good. So let's do the same thing like we did on the carpet and also give it a little bit of a texture. Now you might be noticing that there is a sheen on the walls, and I'm going to go ahead and leave that on there because painted walls have a lot more tendency to have a little bit of a sheen to them than the dry carpet. So we'll leave that sheen on there. So we'll scroll down over here to our geometry. Go ahead and check that. And as you can see, that's way too much. So let's set that down to about 0.1 also. Even 0.1 might be too much. So let's go 0.05. And that'll be a little better. Okay. So I think that's as far as I got on part 4 the first time I did it. So we'll go ahead and save that. And in part 5, we'll get in and start working on the ceiling and then the couch and everything later on. So that's going to be it for this part 4. Hopefully it wasn't too different in the end from the original one that did not save. So hopefully it's not a big contrast between this part 4 and then the following part 5. So if you got questions, feel free to ask questions. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in part 5.